The 8,980th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is letter from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, dated 28 February 2014, addressed to the President of the Security Council, document S/2014/136. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2022/160, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Albania and the United States of America. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2022/160 please raise their hand? I request that those who are voting, I request that those who are against the resolution raise their hand. Abstentions, kindly raise your hands. The result of the voting is as follows: 11 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 3 abstentions. Given, in line with established procedure at the Security Council, this matter and this vote was procedural in nature. The draft resolution is now deemed to be adopted as Resolution 2623/2022. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. And I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Colleagues, on Friday night, we stood together outside this chamber to declare that the Russian veto would not stop us from holding Russia accountable for invading a sovereign state, a state that dared to be a democracy. Russia vetoed Friday's resolution, but as I have said before, Russia cannot veto our voices, Russia cannot veto the Ukrainian people, and Russia cannot veto the UN Charter. Russia cannot and will not veto accountability. Now the Security Council has taken an important step forward toward that accountability. For the first time in decades, it has called for an emergency special session in the General Assembly. The Council members who supported this resolution recognize that this is no ordinary moment. We need to take extraordinary actions to meet this threat to our international system and do everything we can to help Ukraine and its people. Just this morning, President Putin put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert, even though he is invading a country with no nuclear weapons and is under no threat from NATO, a defensive alliance that will not fight in Ukraine. This is another escalatory and unnecessary step that threatens us all. We urge Russia to tone down its dangerous rhetoric regarding nuclear weapons. These are issues that affect all member states, and now in the General Assembly, they can all make their voices heard on Russia's war of choice. We will then vote on a resolution that will hold Russia to account for its indefensible actions and for its violations of the UN Charter. As we speak, rockets continue to rain down on Kyiv and across Ukraine. Tanks are tearing through cities. Russia readies still more brutal weaponry. Bombs that flatten cities and indiscriminately target civilians for an unjustifiable assault fabricated out of lies and the rewriting of history. Russia also propagates outrageous lies about Ukraine's conduct in its own defense. We are alarmed by the mounting reports of civilian casualties, videos of Russians forces moving exceptionally lethal weaponry into Ukraine, and the widespread destruction of civilian facilities like residences, schools, and hospitals. To the Russian officers and soldiers, I say, the world is watching. Photographic and video evidence is mounting, and you will be held to account for your actions. We will not let atrocities slide. Those of us here, safely sitting in this hallowed hall, have a moral responsibility to respond to Russia's desecration of human life. That means humanitarian aid, like the thermal blankets USAID has already airlifted to tens of thousands of Ukrainians in need, and the recently announced $54 million in additional humanitarian assistance that will reach hundreds of thousands more. That means military support, including the additional $350 million of security assistance the United States is shipping to Ukraine. And it means holding the sole aggressor, Russia, accountable for its actions. That will take some courage from some fellow member states, and I know that. They have shown strength. By the inspiration, I would like to stress, for the inspiration, I would ask you to look to the Ukrainian people. They have shown strength, courage, and resilience in the face of Russian guns and soldiers and bombs and rockets. They also maintain the courage to sit down and talk. We welcome their continued willingness to participate in peace talks. On Friday night, darkness descended on Kyiv. Missiles attacked a sheltering city. But the next morning, Ukrainians woke up to a new citizen, a baby girl born to a mother in a bomb shelter. The baby's name is Mia. Photos of her tiny hand gripping her mother as they hid underground have inspired the world. Let us have the courage of Mia's mother. Let us have the courage of the Ukrainian people standing bravely to defend their democracy, their way of life, and their futures. Let us show them that they are not alone, that the world stands behind them, that the United Nations has a purpose, that the additional bravery of the protesters in Russia is not in vain. Let us do everything we can to help the people of Ukraine as they stand up for themselves, for their sovereign country, and for their children. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Dear colleagues, Albania voted in favor and welcomes the adoption of this resolution. Formally, this short text is of purely procedural nature, but its significance is of historic proportions. Last Friday, Evita tried to lock the UN at a time when we need it most. Not anymore. Those 5 lines of the text we just adopted open the big doors of the place where the world meets, the UN General Assembly, to speak out and condemn an unprovoked and unjustified pure act of aggression. The UNGA emergency session is all about condemning an unprovoked war. It is all about upholding the UN Charter. It is about sending a clear and iron-strong message of what is acceptable and what is not, including to the Russian citizens who need to listen to the world and hear it. Russia must be stopped in its attempt to break the international rules-based order to replace it with its will. All member states, especially the small ones like mine, which constitute the majority of the UN, must remember that international law, rules, and the UN Charter are their best friend, their best army, their best defense, their best insurance. Russia's actions undermine them. It is time to learn from the past mistakes, not repeat and perpetuate them. Russia can, at any moment, come back to reason, stop the war, recall its invading troops, go back to talks, but real talks for peace, not for surrender and capitulation. But this needs lucidity, courage and wisdom, not threats for apocalypse. As we said last Friday, this is no time to stay idle or look away. It's time to stand up. Ukraine and Ukrainians are resisting. My stem I budem стоять с Украине. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
vendredi,
on Friday,
la Fédération de
the
Russie
Russian
était seule au
Federation was
sein de ce
alone
Conseil
at the
pour
Security
entraver
Council
l'adoption d'une
in
résolution
blocking the adoption of a
co-parrainée par
resolution
82
that was
États membres
co-sponsored
des
by
Nations Unies.
82 members of the United
demandait
Nations.
la fin de
They
l'agression
called for an
de
end to
l'Ukraine.
the aggression of
La
Ukraine.
France n'accepte pas ce
France
blocage.
cannot
C'est la raison
accept
pour
this
laquelle,
block.
aujourd'hui,
For this reason, today,
elle a voté en faveur de
we
cette
voted
nouvelle
in
résolution
favor of
qui
this new
demande la
resolution,
convocation d'une
which
session
calls for
spéciale de l'Assemblée
an
générale.
emergency special session of the
Le
General
Conseil de
Assembly.
sécurité reste
The
saisi.
Security Council remains
La France
seized of the matter.
restera mobilisée
France
en son sein
will
pour
remain
qu'il assume
mobilized
sa
to that end
responsabilité
to
principale
ensure that there be an upholding of
du
its
maintien
primary
de la paix et de la
responsibility
sécurité
for the maintenance of
internationale.
international peace and
Dans ce
security.
contexte,
In this
le président de la
context,
République
the
française,
President
Emmanuel
of the French
Macron,
Republic,
a
Emmanuel
souhaité que le
Macron,
Conseil de sécurité
called
se
for the
réunisse
Security
dès
Council to
demain
meet
sur la
tomorrow
situation
to address
humanitaire
the
en
humanitarian
Ukraine.
situation
La
in
France
Ukraine.
portera avec le
France
Mexique
will,
un
along
projet
with
de
side
résolution
Mexico, submit
afin
a
de
draft
garantir
resolution
un accès
in order to
humanitaire sans
guarantee
entrave
unfettered
pour
humanitarian
répondre aux besoins
access
urgents
to meet
des
the
populations
urgent
restées
needs
en
of the
Ukraine.
people
Monsieur le
in
Président,
Ukraine. Mr.
face à ceux
President,
qui tentent d'imposer la loi du
in the
plus
light of
fort,
those who are attempting
la
to
communauté
impose the law of the
internationale
strongest, the
doit démontrer
international
son
community
unité,
has a duty to
sa
demonstrate its
solidarité
unity,
et la primauté
its
du droit.
solidarity, and the
La
primacy
France se
of
tient
rule of
fermement
law.
aux
France
côtés de l'Ukraine
stands
et de sa
steadfastly
population.
alongside
Je vous
Ukraine
remercie.
and its people. Thank you.
Я благодарю представителя
I
Франции
thank the
и
representative of France,
предоставляю
and I
слово
now
представителю
give the
Ирландии.
floor to the representative of Ireland.
Mr. President, Ireland once again strongly condemns the Russian Federation's further invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign and independent country. Since we last met on Friday, the Russian Federation has intensified its unjustified and unprovoked attack against Ukraine. Russia's aggression is causing mounting hardship and suffering for the people of Ukraine, who have shown remarkable resilience and resolve. Ireland stands in full solidarity with them today. Mr. President, this Council has a responsibility to act in the face of conflict and to respond to this grave threat to international peace and security. We have failed to exercise that responsibility. We were rendered powerless to do so in spite of the clear will of 11 members of this Council by the Russian Federation's use of the veto in a flagrant attempt to excuse its own military aggression against Ukraine, a fellow member of our United Nations. The use of this anachronistic veto in these terrible and tragic circumstances is reprehensible and undermines the legitimacy of this Council in the eyes of the watching world. However, the veto will not prevent the international community from responding to Russia's blatant breaches of international law, nor will it deter us from holding Russia accountable for its actions. Ireland voted in favour of this draft resolution to decide to call an emergency special session of the General Assembly. Ireland calls on our fellow members of the General Assembly to step up where the Council has failed, to uphold the principles of the UN Charter, to condemn aggression, and to support a return to the path of diplomacy and peace. This is the very least that the people of Ukraine deserve from us in their hour of need. We cannot let them down. Thank you.
Thank you,
Я предоставляю
and I
слово
now give the
представителю
floor
Мексики.
to the representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señor
Thank you very much,
presidente.
President.
El pasado viernes 25
Last
de
Friday,
febrero,
the 25th of
como
February,
consecuencia del
as a
ejercicio del
result of
veto,
an exercise of the veto,
el Consejo
the
de
Security
Seguridad
Council
no pudo
was
cumplir
unable
con su
to
responsabilidad
fulfill its
primordial
primary
de
responsibility
mantener la paz
of maintaining
y la seguridad
international peace and
internacionales,
security,
al no haberse podido
since it
adoptar un
proved
proyecto
unable
de
to adopt a
resolución
draft resolution
en relación con la
in relation
situación
to
en
the
Ucrania,
situation in
a
Ukraine,
pesar de contar con 11 votos
despite 11
afirmativos.
votes in favour.
Ante la parálisis del Consejo
Before
de
the
Seguridad,
paralysis of the
hoy
Security Council,
invocamos
we are
la
today
resolución
invoking Resolution
377,
377,
Unión Pro Paz,
Uniting
para
for Peace,
convocar con urgencia
to convene
un periodo extraordinario de
urgently
sesiones de la
an
Asamblea
extraordinary
General.
session of the General Assembly.
Desde
Since
1945,
1945,
México ha mantenido
has
una
maintained
postura
an unwavering
inquebrantable
stance
en contra del ejercicio
against
del veto
the exercise
por
of
parte
the
de los
veto
miembros
by
permanentes
permanent
del
members of the
Consejo de
Security
Seguridad.
Council.
Como hemos sostenido en
As we
reiteradas
have maintained
ocasiones
on
y hoy
numerous occasions
refrendamos,
and today reiterate,
esta facultad no debería ser
This
un privilegio.
faculty
En
should
todo
not
caso,
be a privilege.
constituye
In
una
all
enorme
cases, it
y muy
constitutes
delicada
an enormous and very
responsabilidad.
delicate
En
responsibility.
consecuencia, México apoya sin
As a
ambajes
consequence,
la
Mexico
convocatoria al
unreservedly
11º
supports
periodo
the convening
extraordinario
of
de
the
sesiones de
11th
emergencia
emergency
de
special
la Asamblea
session
General.
of the General
Y
Assembly.
como lo ha mencionado el
And,
representante
as stated
permanente
by
de
the
Francia,
permanent representative of
convocaremos
France,
a una
we
sesión
will
para
be convening a
analizar la
session to
situación
analyze the
humanitaria que
humanitarian
prevalece en el
situation
terreno
prevailing on the
y
ground
facilitar que la ayuda llegue
and
pronto a
facilitating
quienes
the
más la
expeditious
necesitan.
arrival of
Gracias,
assistance to those
presidente.
who most need it. Thank you very much,
Спасибо, я
President.
предоставляю
I now
слово
give the
представителю
floor, thank
Китая.
you, to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。
Thank you, Mr.
主席先
President.
生，
Mr. President,
当前
at
乌克兰
present,
局势急剧
we
变
are
化，
witnessing dramatic
中
changes
方已多
in
次
the
明
Ukraine
确
situation.
阐述在
China
乌
has
克兰
on
问
many
题上的立
occasions
场，
made its position
这一立
clear
场
on the
没
Ukraine
有
issue,
变化。
and that position remains
我们认为，
unchanged. We
当务
believe
之急
that the
是各
top
方
priority
必
now
须保
is
持
for all
必要
parties
的
to
克制，
exercise the necessary
避
restraint
免
to
乌克兰
prevent the
局势
situation in
进一
Ukraine
步恶
from
化。
getting worse.
中方支
China
持和
supports
鼓
and
励一切
encourages
有
all
利于和
diplomatic
平解
efforts
决乌克兰危
conducive
机
to a
的
peaceful
外
settlement
交
of
努
the
力，
Ukraine crisis,
欢迎
and
俄罗斯
welcomes
同乌克
the
兰
earliest
尽
possible
快举
direct
行
dialogue and
直接对
negotiations
话
between
谈判。
Russia and Ukraine.
同时，
At the same time,
中方支持
China
欧方
supports
与俄
equal-footed
罗斯
dialogues
就
between
欧
the
洲
EU
安
and
全问
Russia
题
on
进
European
行平
security
等对话，
issues,
秉
and
持安全
upholding
不
the
可分
principle
割
of
理念，
undivisible
最终
security
形成
to
平
eventually
衡、
form a
有效、
balanced,
可
effective,
持续
and
的
sustainable
欧
European
洲安
security
全机制。
mechanism.
中方认为，
China believes
联合国安
that the
理会
Security
要
Council
以
should
地区
give
和平稳
priority
定为
to
重，
regional peace and
以各
stability
方普遍
and
安
the
全为重，
universal security of all
为解
countries,
决乌克兰问
and
题
play a
发挥
constructive role
建
in
设性作
resolving the
用。
Ukraine issue.
联合国采取的
Actions
行动
taken by the
应
UN
当
should
有
help
利于
cool
紧
the
张局势降
situation
温，
and facilitate
有利于推动
diplomatic
外交
solution
解决，
to avoid
避免激
escalation
化
of
矛盾。
tensions.
谢谢你，
I
主席
thank
先
you,
生。
Mr. President.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю
Thank
слово
you. I now give
представителю
the floor
Соединенного
to the
Королевства.
representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Kingdom welcomes the result of this vote today. By voting in favour of convening an emergency special session of the General Assembly on Ukraine tomorrow, the members of this Council have laid bare Russia's diplomatic impotence. Russia again was isolated in opposing this resolution. But Russia cannot stop the world from coming together to condemn its invasion of Ukraine. As each day passes in this unprovoked and unjustified war, support for the people of Ukraine, their plight and their fight for freedom grows. So we urge all members of the United Nations to use their voice tomorrow to call for the immediate withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine and end this war. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Mr. President, it is regrettable that the situation in Ukraine has worsened further since the Council last convened on this matter. We reiterate our call for immediate cessation of violence and an end to all hostilities. There is no other choice but to return back to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. Our Prime Minister has advocated this strongly in his recent conversations with the leadership of the Russian Federation and Ukraine. In this regard, we welcome today's announcement by both sides to hold talks at the Belarus border. The global order is anchored on international law, UN Charter, and respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states. We are all agreed on these principles. We continue to be deeply concerned about the safety and security of Indian nationals, including a large number of Indian students who are still stranded in Ukraine. Our evacuation efforts have been adversely impacted by the complex and uncertain situation at the border crossings. It is important to maintain an uninterrupted and predictable movement of people. It is an urgent humanitarian necessity that must be immediately addressed. Taking into consideration the totality of circumstances, we decided to abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Norway voted in favor of the draft resolution. Just 2 days ago, in this chamber, we all saw that Russia was isolated and had no support for its attack on Ukraine. Russia's action is unacceptable. Russia is wrong. Russia is the aggressor that violates the very core principles of international law that the United Nations stands for. On Friday, this Council failed its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Council's response to the breach of the peace and the act of aggression failed because of the veto by the aggressor itself. Preventing such acts is a direct responsibility of this Council. Therefore, it was necessary to reconvene today to decide to call an emergency special session of the General Assembly on this issue. Now we will take this matter to the General Assembly with the purpose of making appropriate recommendation to members for collective measures. Russia will be held accountable. The civilian population, including children, is suffering the consequences of this horrifying conflict: killings, displacement, and disappearances, fighting in and around urban areas, and the use of heavy explosive weapons, destruction of civilian infrastructure. We remain deeply concerned about the protected harm to the civilian population. Norway is on the side of the Ukrainian people and its government. We are providing further assistance to Ukraine. The Norwegian government has today decided to provide $226 million in humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Let me conclude by reiterating that Norway insists that the Russian Federation immediately, completely, and unconditionally stops all fighting and withdraws all its forces from the territory of Ukraine. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank
Сейчас
you.
я предоставляю
I now
слово
give the floor
представителю
to the
Бразилии.
representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, last Friday, my delegation laid out before the Council a comprehensive view of its concerns regarding the security developments in and around Ukraine. Nothing in the intervening period has led us to having had those concerns allayed. On the contrary, in fact, as we speak, the number of casualties, the human suffering, and the risks to international peace and security keep increasing by the hour. Indeed, UNHCR numbers recently spread already place the number of refugees at 422,000. We have voted in favor of the draft resolution before the Council, despite misgivings about its timing and its contribution to achieving peace. These misgivings stem ultimately from our unyielding commitment of respect for and interest in upholding the Charter and the role of the Security Council. The urgency of the situation has convinced us of the need to add the voice of the General Assembly to that of the Security Council in seeking solutions to the crisis in and around Ukraine. This in no way detracts from our firm belief that the Council, with its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, has not yet exhausted the instruments and mechanisms at its disposal to contribute to a negotiated and diplomatic solution towards peace. Therefore, we reiterate our call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, for full respect to humanitarian law, and for a renewed attempt within the Council for the promotion of and support to a process of dialogue between the parties involved, a role that the Council is inherently better equipped to provide in order to bring a peaceful solution to the Ukrainian conflict. The Security Council and the General Assembly must work together. As we renew our calls for an immediate ceasefire, we also appeal to Ukraine and Russia to facilitate the withdrawal of all persons who want to leave the Ukrainian territory. Brazil already wishes to express its gratitude to Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Moldova, Romania, and others who are facilitating the exit of people fleeing the conflict, in particular Brazilians and Latin Americans. Mr. President, let us be exceedingly cautious in moving forward in the General Assembly. The supply of weapons, the recourse to cyber attacks, and the application of selective sanctions, which could affect sectors such as fertilizers and wheat, with a strong risk of famine, entail the risk of exacerbating the conflict and not of solving it. We cannot be oblivious to the fact that these measures enhance the risks of wider and direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. It is our duty, both in the Council and in the General Assembly, to stop and reverse this escalation. We need to engage in serious negotiations in good faith that could allow the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, security guarantees for Ukraine and Russia, and strategic stability in Europe. I thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Сейчас я
I
предоставляю
now give
слово
the floor
Габону.
to Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President.
Le Conseil se réunit ce
The
dimanche
Council is
dans
meeting
l'objectif
this
de donner
Sunday
écho au message
to
sans
try
équivoque
to
de la
echo
communauté
the
internationale contre la
unequivocal
guerre
messages
en
of the
Ukraine.
international community
Comme nous l'avons
against the
déclaré
war in Ukraine.
devant
As
ce
we
Conseil
have
il y a tout juste
stated
2 jours,
before this council,
nous
just 2
réitérons
days
notre
ago,
attachement
we
constant
reiterate our
aux
constant
principes qui fondent la
attachment
Charte
to
des
the
Nations
founding
Unies
principles of the
et qui
Charter of the
s'imposent à
United
chacun de
Nations,
ses États membres.
which
Nous avons
compel
également
each one of
foi
its member
en la
states.
solidarité
We also
internationale
have faith
et
in
au
the
multilatéralisme.
international solidarity and
C'est au nom de
multilateralism.
ces valeurs
It
qui
is
confèrent à notre
on
charte,
behalf
à
of
notre
these
organisation,
values, which give our
toute sa
organisation and our
pertinence
charter
et
its
sa
full
noblesse,
relevance and
que nous avons
nobility,
voté en faveur de la
that we
tenue d'une
voted
réunion spéciale
in
urgente
favour of
de
holding a
l'Assemblée générale
special
des Nations
session
Unies
of the
sur
General Assembly
l'Ukraine.
of the United Nations on Ukraine.
Nos pensées sont à cet instant
Our thoughts
pour les innocents
today
qui essuient
go
les
to
affres
those innocent
d'une
people
guerre
who
qu'ils
are
n'ont ni
suffering
choisie
the horrors of a
ni
war that they have
provoquée,
neither chosen nor
pour ces
provoked.
milliers de civils qui fuient
These
leurs
thousands
maisons,
of civilians who
leurs
are fleeing
villes,
their
leurs pays
homes, their
pour
towns
trouver
and their
refuge
country
ailleurs.
to seek refuge
Mon pays est
elsewhere.
très préoccupé
My
par les
country is
attaques
deeply concerned
contre des
by the
civils et
attacks
contre des
against
biens publics
civilians
civils
and
et
civilian
appelle à la
public goods and
désescalade.
calls for de-escalation.
Nous appelons les belligérants à
We call upon the
s'abstenir de
belligerents
toute
to abstain
utilisation
from
ou menace
any use
d'utilisation
or threat
d'armes
of the use
dont les effets
of
seraient
weapons whose
indiscriminés.
effects would be indiscriminate.
Pour terminer, le Gabon continue
Finally,
d'appeler
Gabon
à un
continues to
cessez-le-feu
call
immédiat
for an immediate
et à la
ceasefire
reprise d'un dialogue
and a
franc
resumption of
et sincère.
frank, sincere dialogue.
Il est encore temps, il est toujours temps
It is still
de
time.
choisir le dialogue
It is always
et la
time to
diplomatie
choose dialogue
à la
and
logique de la
diplomacy
force. Je vous remercie.
over force. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Сейчас я
I
предоставляю
now
слово
give the floor
Объединенным
to
Арабским
the
Эмиратам.
United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, the UAE regrets that the situation in Ukraine has worsened since our last meeting and reiterates its call for a cessation of hostilities. We remain steadfast in our belief that dialogue and diplomacy should be the only path to resolving differences. We therefore welcome today's news that talks may commence tomorrow morning on the Ukraine-Belarus border. This is urgent and much needed. We will work tirelessly to support efforts towards a peaceful resolution. As we conveyed on Friday, the developments in Ukraine undermine regional and international peace and security. The UAE reiterates that the protection of civilians in Ukraine is of the utmost importance, particularly as the security situation escalates. Civilians trying to reach safety must be able to leave unhindered. It is of paramount importance that necessary humanitarian aid is delivered to those in need. Space for humanitarian assistance must be preserved so humanitarian actors can maintain access to civilians. We emphasize the importance of upholding international humanitarian law and mitigating the impact of this conflict on the most vulnerable. We reiterate once again the absolute need to uphold the principles of the UN Charter, in particular respect for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all member states. I thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Сейчас я предоставляю
I
слово
now
представителю
give the
Ганы.
floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, let me begin by acknowledging the dangerous moments we live in and noting the necessity for diplomacy to triumph over war. I therefore urge that even in this difficult moment, and as diplomatic representatives of our states, we maintain the commitment of our states to dialogue and the objectives of peace. Last Friday, because of the exercise of the veto, this Council was unable to assume its primary responsibility to act on a threat to international peace and security following the Russian Federation's aggression against Ukraine. It is time for the General Assembly to assume its residual responsibility and to pronounce itself on the matter. And it is for this reason that Ghana voted for this resolution just adopted. As we consider the resolution we have just adopted, it is important that we do so with sobriety, not only for this generation, but also for those whose blood and toil speak to us from the restless graves of the two world wars. As a condition for becoming a member of the United Nations, we have all declared to accept the obligations contained in the Charter in averment of our peace-loving nature. Today, the peace we say we love is threatened. Ghana therefore calls on all member states to participate in the emergency special session of the General Assembly in a constructive manner, to unite around the call for peace in stopping this unjustified war that has already caused the needless loss of many lives. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you.
Сейчас я сделаю
I shall now deliver a
выступление в
statement in my
качестве
capacity
представителя
as a representative of the Russian Federation.
Российская Федерация
The Russian
проголосовала
Federation
против
voted against
представленного
the
проекта в
draft
связи с тем,
resolution
что
submitted in connection with the
его
fact that
авторы
its
предлагают
sponsors
расписаться в том, что
proposed
Совет
that it be
Безопасности
registered that the Security
не
Council
способен
failed
реализовать
to
свою основную
exercise its
ответственность
primary
по поддержанию
responsibility for the
международного
maintenance of
мира
international
и
peace
безопасности.
and security.
При этом мы
At the
не увидели
same
даже
time, we did
намека
not
на
see even
попытку
a
найти
hint at an
конструктивное решение в
attempt
Совете.
to reach a constructive solution at the
Ведь мы 2 дня
Council.
назад заблокировали
And
уже
yet,
один
2 days
проект
ago,
именно по той
we
причине,
blocked
что он
a
был однобоким
draft
и
specifically for the
несбалансированным.
reason that it was both one-sided and imbalanced.
Никаких новых
We
инициатив
have
мы не
not
увидели.
seen any new initiatives since then.
Совет ООН и
The
Совет
UN and the
Безопасности
United
создавались
Nations
в
Security
послевоенный
Council were
период с целью
created
избежать
in a
ужасов новой
post-war
войны.
period with the aim of saving succeeding generations from the scourge
Для
of
этого
war.
мировые
To that
державы
end,
согласились
global powers
договариваться между собой,
concurred
в
to reach
идеале
agreement
находить
among
консенсус.
themselves, ideally to reach consensus.
И в любом
And
случае
in
не
any
пытаться
event,
навязывать свои
certainly
решения друг
not to
другу или
attempt to
пытаться
push through
игнорировать интересы
decisions on one
кого-либо
another,
из членов
nor to
P5.
attempt to disregard the interests of any
Именно
member
поэтому в
of the
Совете
P5. This is
предусмотрено право
precisely why
блокировать
the
решения
Council has
для
the
постоянных
vested
членов.
right for permanent members to block a
Это не
decision.
привилегия,
This
а
is not a
инструмент
privilege.
обеспечения столь
This is a
необходимого для всего
mechanism
мира
for
баланса
ensuring the
интересов.
balance of interests, which is of such
А через него
paramount
и глобальной
importance for the entire
стабильности.
world, and through this balance of interests for the achievement of
Попытка
global
обойти
stability.
позицию России,
Any attempt to
проигнорировать ее,
circumvent the position of the
проигнорировать
Russian
ее,
Federation,
противоречит
any
самой
attempt to
основе устава ООН.
disregard it undermines the very bedrock of the UN Charter.
Надо не продавливать
There's a
подобные
need
схемы,
not
а
to push
пытаться искать
through
точки
such
соприкосновения,
schemes, but
как бы
rather to
этого не
endeavor
пытались
to
избежать наши
find
западные
common
партнеры.
ground, regardless of our Western partners' attempts to avoid this,
В том числе, когда они
including
проигнорировали
when
наши
they
легитимные
disregarded our
озабоченности в связи с
legitimate
политикой
concerns in
НАТО
connection with
и
NATO's
нарушением
policy
западными странами
and
базовых
the
принципов
Western
ОБСЕ
countries'
о
violation
неделимости
of the core
безопасности.
principles of the OSCE on the indivisibility of security.
Сейчас нужно
Now there's a
сосредоточиться на
need to
исправлении
focus
ситуации,
on
приведшей
resolving
к
the
кризису,
situation
который мы
which
переживаем.
precipitated the crisis with which we are grappling.
Он начался не с
This
запуском
crisis broke
российской
out not as
специальной
a
военной
result
операции
of
на
the
Украине,
launch of the Russian
а
special
гораздо
military
раньше,
operation in
тогда,
Ukraine,
когда вы
but
8
much
лет
earlier,
делали
when
вид,
for
что не
8
замечаете
years you
преступления
turned a blind
украинских
eye to the
националистов на
crimes
Донбассе.
perpetrated by the Ukrainian nationalists in
И у
Donbass.
вас опять
And
сегодня
again,
не нашлось ни
today,
одного
you
слова
did not
сострадания к жителям
mention
Донбасса.
at all the suffering of the residents of
Ведь
Donbass.
именно
For
разрушенные
it was
вооруженными силами
indeed
Украины и националистами
what was
дома на Донбассе
the homes in Donbass which was
западные СМИ
raised
сейчас
by
чаще
the
всего
Ukrainian armed
беззастенчиво выдают
forces,
за последствия
and these
нашей
images are now
военной
being
операции
taken
на
by
Украине.
Western military outlets and being portrayed shamelessly as the consequences of our military operation in Ukraine.
И сегодня на
And today,
этом заседании мы
During
вновь
this meeting, once
слышим
again,
вранье и
we
фейки,
hear lies, deceit, and fakes
а не избирательные бомбардировки
about the
украинских
indiscriminate
городов,
shelling of
больниц и
Ukrainian
школ.
cities, hospitals, and schools.
Российская армия не
The Russian
угрожает
army
мирным
does
жителям
not
Украины,
threaten
не обстреливает
civilians in
мирные
Ukraine.
объекты.
It's not shelling civilian
Угрозу для
infrastructure.
них
A
сейчас представляют
threat to
украинские
civilians is now
националисты,
posed by
фактически
Ukrainian nationalists who have
взявшие
effectively
заложники жителей Украины и
seized as hostages the
прикрывающиеся ими
residents
как
of
живым
Ukraine,
щитом.
and they are using them now as human shields.
Есть множество
There is
свидетельств,
a multitude of
распространяемых простыми украинцами, о
evidence
том, что
from
националисты,
Ukrainians that the
невзирая на их
nationalists,
протесты,
despite
размещают
their
тяжелую
protests,
технику,
are taking heavy
системы залпового
equipment,
огня в жилых
multiple
кварталах.
rocket launchers, and deploying them in
Это
residential
вопиющее
areas.
нарушение
This is an
международного
egregious
гуманитарного права,
violation of
которое должно
international
получить
humanitarian
должное
law,
осуждение.
which needs to be duly condemned.
По сути, это та же тактика,
Essentially, this
которую
is the same
применяют
tactic
террористы
that is
ИГИЛ.
being used by ISIL terrorists.
Вся ответственность за
All
возможные последствия
responsibility for the
лежит на
possible
майданном режиме.
repercussions lies at the feet of the Maidan
Жителям
regime.
Украины
The
угрожает
residents of
также
Ukraine are also
бесконтрольная
threatened
раздача
by
радикалами
the
всем
ongoing
радикалами и
radicals
властью, всем желающим,
giving
включая
power to all
специально
of those
выпущенных из
who
тюрем
wish, including
преступникам, оружие,
prisoners
которым
from
уже стреляют в
escapees from
руках
jail.
грабителей и
They are taking
мародеров.
weapons which are now being used by marauders and thieves and criminals.
В соцсетях достаточно
Social
подтверждений
networks
этому от
have
жителей Киева и
sufficient
других
evidence of
городов.
this from the residents of
Это
Kiev and other cities.
демонстрирует
This demonstrates
бездумное отношение
the
украинской власти к
reckless
своим
approach of the
гражданам.
Ukrainian authorities vis-à-vis their own citizens.
Сейчас против России в
Now,
соцсетях
against the Russian
развязана
Federation and social
информационная
networks,
война.
there has been an information war has been unleashed.
Поскольку свидетельств
Insofar
разрушения
as evidence
гражданской
of destruction of
инфраструктуры
civilian
российскими
infrastructure by
военными
Russian military
за таковые
does not
выдаются
exist,
украинские удары и
Ukrainian
ошибочные попадания, а
strikes
также
and
кадры и
accidental
видеоролики из
strikes
Донбасса,
and videos
фиксирующие как раз
from
преступления
Donbass are being
украинских
portrayed as
националистов.
such, and these are actually being carried out by the Ukrainian nationalists.
Кроме того, в соцсетях
Furthermore,
размещены
social
целые
networks
обучающие
has
пособия
a
о том,
host
как
of
снять фейки,
educational
порочащие нашу
manuals
военную
about
операцию.
how to create fakes to depict our military
А всего по
operations
украинским
and
соцсетях гуляет
fabrications,
сегодня
and these social networks have 1.2 million
подобных фейков.
such fakes
Призываю наших коллег не
We urge our
способствовать
colleagues not
распространению
to
подобной
aid and abet
дезинформации,
the proliferation of
хотя,
such
боюсь, эти
disinformation,
призывы
although I
вновь не будут
fear that
услышаны.
once again this call will fall on deaf ears.
Сейчас я возобновляю свои
I now
функции
resume my
председателя
duties as
Совета
the President
Безопасности
of the
и
Security
предоставляю
Council,
слово
and I give the floor
представителю
to the
Украины.
representative of Ukraine.
Distinguished members of the Security Council, I would like to express my gratitude to those of you who have supported the request to call the UN General Assembly emergency session. I immediately express my regret that once again the Rule 20 of the Provisional Rules of the Security Council has not been properly applied by the Presidency. However, I expressed my relief that this rape of the Institute of the Presidency of the UN Security Council will be over in less than 48 hours. For those who appear to see no reason in supporting the request to have the emergency session, despite my yesterday's letter sent to all of you, but the representative of the aggressor, I would like just to tell you the following. Do you know the most often warning now in the most of Ukrainian cities? Attention, air raids, please proceed to the shelters. And I do recommend you to look at the pictures and footages of what happened afterwards, day to day, night to night. I will continue to invite all members of the Security Council to join the catharsis, this purgation of this institution that will only save this institution for next generations. Russia persists in its aggression despite the initial plan of Blitzkrieg, and it failed, and we all see it. This failure prompted the bloody and mad Russian leadership to order heavy shellings of the residential areas, critical infrastructure and storages of hazard materials in retaliation for Ukrainian resilience and resistance. It is extremely alarming that the Russian president has resorted today to open nuclear blackmail. The world must take this threat very seriously. Excellencies, now the most intense fighting occurs around the Ukrainian capital, as well as in the northeast, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernigiv, and in the south, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Mariupol. Long-range operational and tactical aircraft, high-precision long-range weapons, multiple rocket launcher systems are widely used against the Ukrainians. Among the most telling recent examples of Russian course of action in Ukraine, missile strike on the town of Vasilki, which is practically a suburb of the capital. A missile hit the oil depot, causing a large-scale fire. It was also shelling in Kharkiv that damaged the gas pipeline. According to the Ukrainian Health Minister Viktor Pleshko, at least 16 children were killed since 24 February 2022, when a large-scale military aggression against Ukraine was launched. On February 26, a 7-year-old girl who had been seriously wounded during the shelling of the kindergarten son in the city of Akhtirka died. On the same day, due to the shelling and gunshots, one child was killed and 2 wounded in the National Children's Hospital Ahmadit in Kyiv. Due to threat of air raids, maternity hospitals in a number of Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv, Kharkiv, Sumy, Irpin, Bucha, to name just a few, could not operate normally. Ukrainian children are born in bomb shelters. According to the Ministry of Education of Ukraine, as of now, more than 350,000 school children have no access to education. 33 schools with over 5,500 students are closed due to severe insecurity in civil areas. Today I have brought these appalling facts to the attention of the UNICEF, asking to respond immediately to the situation, give proper qualification to the actions of the Russian Federation, and take all possible measures to stop further deaths and violence against children in Ukraine due to the blatant Russian aggression. I sent it by the diplomatic note, and I'm looking forward to work with the UNICEF on the issue. The losses of the enemy as early February 27 have amounted to nearly 4,300 personnel killed and over 200 taken as prisoners of war. The detailed information is posted by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Distinguished members of the Security Council, as always, Russia denies that its soldiers are taken prisoners, that taken prisoners are recognized, or the soldiers that are killed are recognized. In this regard, Ukraine has opened a hotline entitled "Come Back Alive from Ukraine" for relatives of Russian soldiers who are not aware of their whereabouts and cannot contact them. The hotline is opened by the government of Ukraine. Over 100 calls from Russian mothers were received during the first hour of its work. It is unfortunate, however, that today, pursuant to the decision of the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation, the line and the dedicated website has been shut down. So I want to use this opportunity to read the telephone number for anyone in Russia who would like to call and ask about the killed or taken prisoners or soldiers who are taken prisoners in Ukraine and inquire about their well-being. It is 180 89 42 01 86 0. We will distribute this information after the meeting, and I hope that after I read this number, the Russian Federation and its government would not shut down the website of the United Nations. We condemn that Belarus is being deeply engaged in the armed aggression against Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian aggression, this country has provided its territory for Russian offensive. Today, the Ukrainian city of Zhytomyr, in fact the airport of Zhytomyr, was hit by Iskander missiles launched from the territory of Belarus. What an invitation for the negotiations at the border of Belarus. Or was it an escalation and raising stakes by the aggressor on the eve of the negotiations? Excellencies, Ukraine filed a case against the Russian Federation at the International Court of Justice, and a request for the court to issue an order of provisional measures against Russia. We will distribute this information, and very soon, if it's not already there, it will be available on the site of the court. Ukraine seeks an emergency hearing and an order by the court that Russia must cease its unlawful attack on Ukraine. Russia will have to answer for its behavior at the World Court in The Hague. The court has jurisdiction to hear Ukraine's case and to order emergency measures on the basis of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, so-called Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention is one of the most important international treaties drafted in response to the horrors of the World War II and the Holocaust. Russia, however, has twisted the concept of genocide and perverted the solemn treaty obligation to prevent and punish genocide. It has made an absurd and unfounded claim of alleged genocide as a justification and pretext for its own aggression against Ukraine, and violation of the sovereignty and human rights of the Ukrainian people. Ukraine's case before the ICJ will establish that Russia's aggression against Ukraine is based on a lie and a gross violation of international law, and must be stopped. As the Ukrainian people continue to bravely stand against Russian aggression, Russia's lies will be exposed, and Russia's contempt for international law will be confirmed. Ukraine will bring Russia to account. I will switch to Russian. В завершение
To conclude,
я хотел бы
I wish
обратиться лично к
to
послу
turn personally
Российской
to the
Федерации.
ambassador of the Russian Federation.
На одном из предыдущих заседаний я говорил о детях и родителях,
and their
которые
parents,
гордятся или
parents who
стыдятся из-за
took pride
поступков
of or were
своих
ashamed
родных.
of the steps taken by their kin.
Мне показалось тогда,
It
что
seemed
вы
to me at that
приняли
point
мои слова
that
очень лично.
you took my words very personally.
Я был бы готов
I
взять
would
свои
be
слова обратно,
ready
если
to take my words
вы
back
последуете
if you were to
примеру
follow
своего
the
коллеги
example of your
Олега
colleague,
Анисимова,
Oleg Anisimov,
главы делегации Российской
head of the
Федерации на
delegation of the Russian
закрытии
Federation, for the
межправительственной
closure of in the
экспертной группы
intergovernment expert
по
group
изменениям
on
климата,
climate change,
Intergovernmental
the
Panel on
Intergovernmental
Climate
Panel
Change.
on Climate Change.
Сегодня в ответ на
Today,
эмоциональное
in response to the
выступление
to the emotionally
украинской
charged
делегации,
statement of the Ukrainian delegation,
а нам сейчас сложно
and
говорить
it
без
is
эмоций,
difficult now for us to speak without
он
emotion,
сказал, что,
he
я
said,
цитирую,
and I quote,
те, кто видят
that those
происходящее,
who see what is taking place
не находят никакого оправдания
can find
нападению
no
на
justification
Украину.
for the attack
Конец
against
цитаты.
Ukraine. End of quote.
Это было сделано на
This
закрытой части
was
мероприятия.
delivered during the open part, the
Однако
closed part
подтверждено
of the event, but it was
несколькими
confirmed
участниками,
by a number of participants
а позже и самим
and
господином
subsequently
Анисимовым.
by Mr. Anisimov himself.
В жизни всегда есть место
There's
выбору.
always place in life for choices. There
Например,
are always options. For example,
можно остаться человеком,
one can remain a human being, a person,
можно продолжать
or
защищать зло.
they can continue to defend
И этот
evil.
выбор всегда
And this
за
is a
каждым.
choice which lies with
I thank you.
every individual, always. I thank you.
Список ораторов исчерпан.
The list of
Заседание
speakers is
закрывается.
closed. The meeting stands adjourned.